Welcome to the Beyond the Bestseller podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Schupnecht, and today's guest is Alison Miller, author of Finish Your Dissertation Once and for All. Welcome, Alison.
Glad to be here.
Well, so your your title of your book like kind of sums it all up, right? Like finish your dissertation once and for all. So tell me about what led you to write this book.
When I finished graduate school and had finished writing this giant paper, my dissertation, within a few months, I started a coaching business, specifically coaching graduate students to earn their PhDs and other graduate degrees. And I just have been someone who's always interested in how do we get ourselves to do what matters? How do we move in the directions that we want to go? How do we align our behavior with our values, our commitments, our aspirations, our goals when we don't feel like it, when we don't want to, when it's hard, when it's overwhelming, when it's difficult, when it's frightening, when there are difficult circumstances. And so in the coaching relationships I had with people, and also how I had gotten through my own dissertation experience, because I really struggled terribly through my master's degree with procrastination and imposter syndrome and doubt and all kinds of negative behaviors, and started to change my ways with my dissertation. And then that, in combination with the work with clients, started to articulate an approach to how can we do something that's really hard that also really matters to us. And I mean, I could have written the book probably about other things, but my audience has been graduate students, so that's why I chose to focus there on
Yeah.
how can you finish your dissertation once and for all, because that's what you really want. You want to get to the point where you never have to do it again.
Yeah. 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 Well, so that's fascinating. So like you kind of went through the process yourself and then used what you had learned about the process to teach other people how to get through it as well. So it reminds me a lot of Cal Newport. Are you familiar with Cal Newport? In fact, I'm reading right now, what is it called? Slow Productivity,
Mm-hmm.
but he's just such a advocate for, well, deep work, one of the titles of one of his books, and then the slow productivity, like just, making slow progress on things, and slow not meaning like it takes forever, but like slow, like little by little, making that progress
Yes.
over time. And some of it is just like having the discipline, right? Like being disciplined, putting things on your calendar to, set aside the time for the things that you want to get done. So interesting. Like I could picture some of like what you're teaching is probably very in line with the things that he talks
Yes.
about. Yeah. So tell me about just like the how you've helped people then with your coaching program. Like how do you approach that with them? And so what are some of the things that you teach people in order to help them accomplish that goal and get it done?
Well, there's a couple of things I would say are especially important that I teach, and both of them are connected to helping yourself show up in a way where you're actually present with what you're doing and you can make contact with the work. Like you're making contact with what you're doing in such a way that you can progress it. And, our presence, when we actually show up and we bring our presence, we bring our energy and our attention and our focus, makes time more usable. And that's what I want to do. I want people to be able to make use of the time that they have, because time is a really important resource that we have, that we can be in this relationship with, where we're in a race against time. We're trying to control time. We're trying to manage time. We're trying to squeeze in as much as I can do in a short amount of time, when none of that really ends up working out very well for us. So one thing that I think everyone needs is some kind of an infrastructure. That it's very easy to move through the day doing things based on what occurs to us in our brain. And that doesn't really work. um,
Sure.
it's really thinking through, in reality, when are the things that matter to me going to happen? And have I given them adequate time? And have I thought through the flow of the day? So we actually in have a I started a co-working community during the pandemic called the Academic Writer Space. And I actually sold my first business, the dissertation coach, so I could focus on this new business. And we have a process, we call it reset, where we teach people 4 steps to build an infrastructure for productivity and well-being. Now, they aren't like the only 4 steps on earth. You could do that in all kinds of ways, but for your listeners, everyone needs to take time every single week to plan and to think through. And it takes time to learn how to plan in a way that works. But one piece of advice I have for everybody is start to plan in a way where you're disentangling the different things you need to do and separating them from each other so that it is clear to you when you are doing what, so that whatever it is that you're working on has a chance of getting you and your presence to show up to it. And the plan needs to detail out for most of us what if we have a lot going on, how do you actually flow through the day? When are you having lunch? Do you really expect yourself from go to a meeting and jump into a document and start editing heavily? That's not realistic. Thinking through the day and then also setting up your environment. The physical and digital world that you're working in and operating in is having a profound impact on your motivation, your ability to actually cross over and engage. So if you can take time once a day to look at your plan for the next day, get it clear, and then find the things in the physical and digital world that you need to do the work, it's kind of a way of sealing the deal on the plan, increasing the odds that you align your behavior with it. So you have to have that infrastructure. I think that's vital. The second thing is then you're going to show up to execute the plan. And guess what? The version of you that you thought was going to show up when you made the plan is not present. Rarely is the version of us who's present who we thought was going to be here. But that's not a problem. If you can learn to do this one thing, it's going to make a huge difference. Learn to observe the version of you who's present, and if the version of you who's shown up is actually compatible with doing what you said you're going to do. Now, if you don't have a plan, it's very hard to assess your compatibility, and that's why the plan is so important. What's happening in reality for most of us is that we are on a continuum moving in and out of compatibility with working effectively. Sometimes we're not compatible at all on one end of the continuum, and sometimes we're highly compatible with working. If you're highly compatible, great, get in there and work. And if you notice that the version of you who's here right now is irritable, is really tired, has a headache, is thirsty, is overwhelmed and scattered, you want to know who's here to work. If the version of you who's present is insufficiently compatible with making meaningful contact with the work in a way that you can progress it, it's not a problem. It's an opportunity to care for yourself, to attend to yourself, to ask yourself, okay, what's within my influence? What can I do here now to increase the compatibility between me and the thing I'm doing? Sometimes that means you are going to maybe do some deep breathing, or you're going to have a sandwich, or you're going to make a new to-do list where you break things down into more details, right? You're going to have some Advil. I don't know. You're going to do something to increase the compatibility. And sometimes it doesn't matter what you do. You are just not compatible with doing that thing. And so you're going to do something else right now that you actually are compatible with. And you're going to come back to that thing later when your compatibility with it is better. And if you start to think about it that way, you realize it's not that I'm not motivated or that there's something wrong with me or I need to go to deep therapy. What I need to do is work on my compatibility. And I think when you see people start to do that regularly, it is remarkable how much more potency they have to show up and get something done in a given day.
Mm-hmm. I love everything you're saying. So I started my business. It's only been like a few months now. And, I noticed that at the beginning, like I was open to everything, right? Like every meeting, every conversation,
100%.
you have to be, right? Like you're just like, figuring it out. And every time I have a day where I'm just like, holy cow, I just feel like I got hit by a bus. Like, what just happened to me? Like the day just like flew by. It's always been good, but it's like at the end of the day, I'm just like, I feel like my energy got drained in a certain way, or like I just didn't show up happy in some situations. And then I have been looking at that. I'm a big fan of time blocking. So, basically everything on my calendar is like blocked out. Like I know that as soon as we're done here, I'm working on client work for the next 3 hours. Like that's how I do it. But I've noticed that like when I have those days where I just feel like I got hit by a bus during the day, I'm like, okay, I have to adjust this so that I know, you know, that I'm just basically like adjusting my time block so I know like okay why did this not go well for me or what when I have like 4 hours of back-to-back meetings I am not a happy person like I know that I need to figure out a way to add in some breaks in there or just adjust things so that I'm always showing up I like your wording like compatible with the task that's on my list so I'm constantly working on that and I'm curious if like is that always a work in progress? Like does that ever like do you ever get to a place where you're just like everything just flows smoothly or is it just always a look ahead and reflect and make improvements as you go forward?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think for most of us, this is our job. Our daily job is to observe ourselves, notice our compatibility, and make adjustments. What I do think is that with practice, you can get better at that, where it starts to become more of second nature. This really is fundamentally about taking a stance towards yourself that's deeply compassionate, really beginning to allow ourselves to be as we are and learning how to work with the version of us who's shown up. I think you can get better at that, but I don't think the need to do it really stops.
Hmm.
And what starts to happen when you really commit to this practice of working with the version of you who's shown up is that you start to become more and more knowledgeable of how do I create conditions for myself that increase the odds that I'm going to actually do what I say what I'm going to do when I say I'm going to do it. Right.
Yep.
And we want to learn what are the conditions in which I can work effectively. But the thing is that that is dynamically changing. What works today might not work tomorrow. The point isn't to have one or two tools in your toolkit of what you do when you need to make adjustments, is to have kind of a wider range in a repertoire and being able to stay kind of agile and flexible, dynamically responding to the natural unfolding of life.
Hmm. Yeah, you made that point. I think of like things will be going like really smoothly for me with my time blocking, I work from home, so like, you have to be whatever, just like I get in the rhythm of things. Then all of a sudden we have a day where like I don't remember that the kids are off of school that day, and then the kids are home, and then I'm like, oh, like that affects my day, and I have to start planning around like making sure that my kids are, high school, but
Yeah.
but making sure that like I am setting myself up so like the distractions that are inevitably going to happen in, late morning when they wake up on those days when they're not in school, that I start planning around some of that stuff. So I've gotten better and better at that with that over time. But somewhat it's just having that awareness of like what's impacting my day and, how I need to adjust things. Um, and I, couldn't help but think of like, you know, the women who are listening to this who are wanting to write a book. And like, I think a lot of times it comes down to for them scheduling that time.
Right.
Because, that becomes, it's like and I put myself in the same boat. Like, you want to write a book, right? It's not just going to happen. Like, you have to like set aside that time and say, okay, during this, whatever it is, hour a day or, an hour a few times a week or whatever, that's what I'm going to focus on during this time. And there's going to be those days where something comes up and that time you're not compatible with the version of yourself that you wanted to
Yeah.
be at that time, right? Um, but just being kind of like intentional about that time and making sure that you're creating the time for
Yes.
the things that you want to
Yes.
get done. What are the other things, you mentioned like obviously your book is about writing your dissertation, but what are the other things that can apply to as far as you know, project work or things that people want to get done?
I mean, I really think to anything. I mean, anything that you need to do, you want to do, you aspire to do, that's challenging, that isn't just a simple thing for you to do. It needs to be broken down. It needs to be thought through in terms of its parts. Another thing that is incredibly important is learning to engage with projects, with the process of the project. A lot of times we engage with things with the end in mind prematurely. Where, for example, if you're writing a book, and I know you'd probably know this from working with writers, so many of us sit down with our pen on the paper or our hands on the keyboard with the reader or the reviewer in mind in early drafting. And that's completely premature. We need to really learn how to let go and allow ourselves to whatever, it doesn't even have to be a writing project. Let ourselves learn, gives ourselves permission to be beginners. Let ourselves explore and make a mess so we've got something to clean up, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, be willing to, we call it the Frankenstein draft. Like, be willing to do the rough and ugly version. Be willing to experiment, explore, and not expect yourself to be performing at a level that you're not capable of performing at yet. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's really taming these perfectionistic ideals that are so harmful. Anne Lamott, in a great book called Bird by Bird, says, perfectionism is the enemy of the people. It is the voice of the oppressor.
So I, one of the quotes I always go to is Sheryl Sandberg's "Done is better than perfect," um, which is good and bad in a way. I mean, you don't want to just like write something that's terrible and put it out there, right? But like to me, sometimes we overthink things so much, and it's like we wrote the book, but then we don't want to like you sit on it, and then you're like, oh, but, right? Like all these things that you just like
Right.
you don't want to release it into the world because it's maybe not 100% perfect yet,
Yes.
or and sometimes it's just like you it doesn't have to be
It doesn't
perfect
have
like
to
you
be right.
right.
Yeah, no. And I think we have to remember we live in like a photoshopped world. We live in a world where we hold each other to standards that we would not hold ourselves to. And we do, I mean, most of us have spent too much time in the comments sections of social media and newspaper articles, right? To see there is kind of a hyper judgmental thing going on in our culture that I think has a lot of us feel frozen and afraid of just like actually being ourselves. But it's up to each of us to create space for ourselves to be human, to make mistakes. You know, when my publisher told me it doesn't matter how many times we copy edit the book, when you get the actual book, you're going to find typos in it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right?
I know,
You're
and
perfect.
I'm always amazed. What's the book? There's a book called Influence. I can't think of who the author is, but it's like a book. It like says right on the cover, 5 million copies sold. And it's like this huge bestseller, whatever. And I read it, and I got to a point, and I was like, there is an error in this book. Like how is there an error in this book? And I thought, well, traditionally published books, sometimes, they're printed like in mass quantities at the beginning, so I thought, well, maybe they just didn't catch it and, it had already been printed, whatever. Well, then I just out of curiosity, I pulled up the ebook because ebooks are really easy to fix. And the error was in the ebook. And I was like, I use that as an example to authors. I'm like, it doesn't matter like how many people look at it, like how much of a process it goes through with editing and
Yes.
proofreading and
Yes.
and how many
Because
people
perfect
have read
really
it.
is
Like,
the enemy of the good, as they
yeah.
say.
Yeah.
True. It's true.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, so it just you can't beat yourself up. There's always going to be something later, but
Always.
well, so I do want to talk about your community a little bit. You mentioned that you started that community is it for academics who are in the process of
Yeah.
writing their dissertation?
Well, it is for really any writer. Most of our writers are either professors, postdocs, graduate students, some kind of academic professional. We do have also some creative writers, and I live in Los Angeles, so there's people who pop in who are writing screenplays and TV pilots. But it's primarily a space for people who want to get hard things done. And they want
Yeah.
some gracious accountability and support, and like to be nurtured along the way, and have a space where they feel there's structure and there's, a sense of like, oh, everybody else here is working. I'm going to work too. I will say, as someone who's done an enormous amount of one-on-one coaching, so my training is in psychology. I got a PhD in clinical psychology, but then I moved into coaching. I didn't really practice privately as a therapist. I think there's something really powerful about aiming to do hard things in community, and that we are able to accomplish things in this environment of co-regulation, in this community environment of compassion, that we can't do one-on-one, that we are actually discovering together as a community. How do we work in a way that actually works? And to me, the community is about creating an environment for our members to discover for themselves and, in a sense, author their own approach to working that works for them. And I don't like to define what I mean. Like, I don't want to say working in a way works means this, and I have a couple of guidelines. I think it's helpful to think about, if I want to work in a way that works, you know what I want? I want to be able to produce results. I want to get that book written. I want to get that article submitted. I want to be able to take my energy and my attention and my effort and land it on the work and actually progress it. And I want to know how to do that reasonably reliably, not perfectly, but reliably. That's a really important component of working in a way that works. The second component is that we are working in a way that works for us as humans, as biological beings, as relational beings, as psychological beings. Like, we have real needs. And so that we're learning how to work in a way that is honoring of the human who's doing the work, so that we're centering our well-being in our approach to work. And this idea of paying attention to compatibility is meeting the needs of both, how do I actually progress my work, and how do I progress my work in a way that is honoring of the human is doing it. By working on compatibility, you are actually helping yourself in both ways learn how to work in a way that works. And I would say we are always learning that. We are in an ongoing discovery of, how do I day in and day out engage with something like that's really challenging, like writing? How do I do that in a way that really works for the writing, for the project, and for me?
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Alison, for coming on to share about your book. I don't know how many of the listeners are writing a dissertation, but I love that you shared how your community can impact people who, even if they're not going through that there's, other benefits of your community. So I will link to the book and to your community in the show notes. Is there anything else, any other way that listeners can learn more about you and what you're doing?
Sure. Well, if you go to our website, you can connect on the bottom with our social media, because I do put out videos regularly where I talk about all kinds of ideas that happen in our community. And anybody who wants to can sign up and come and co-work with us in our co-working sessions for 2 weeks for free. They don't have to become a member. It's not one of those businesses that we don't have to put down a credit card. I always encourage people, just come and co-work with us.
Yeah.
Get some stuff done. It's free, right?
Cool.
We are international community. So yeah, I'm on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, all the places.
Perfect. All right, Alison. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, we'll link to all of those in the show notes so people can reach out and connect with you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kelly.
For a community of women writers to support and inspire you on your journey, join the Author Power Circle. Connect weekly with fellow authors, stay accountable, and move your book forward in an encouraging community. Learn more at kellyshuckneck.com.